heard the Prime Minister engage in this at any level.
No.
It's about time he did. This is an issue of pressing national security concern. It's a question of national honour. It's time for Number 10 to step up to this and actually address it directly.
I'm delighted now to be joined by Colonel Richard Williams, the former commanding officer in the SAS. Colonel Williams, it's always a pleasure to have your esteemed company. Thank you for joining us tonight on Farage. It just seems astonishing to me that the ultimate elite regiment, the SAS, are suing the government. How did we get to this point?
Yeah, it's more than astonishing. And you can see from the flag on the poster behind me where I happen to be right now in the United States. And it's astonishing them too. I mean, during my time in command over 2005 to 2008 in Iraq, we worked closer than ever before.
In the carefully calibrated world of political assurances where prime ministers facing justified criticism over legislation that threatens those who served their country deploy confident rhetoric designed to provide false comfort whilst avoiding substantive engagement with actual concerns, where promises that there will be no vexatious prosecutions carry no legal weight and provide no enforceable protection, and where the gap between ministerial assurances and legislative reality becomes apparent only after laws are passed and veterans find themselves facing exactly the consequences they were promised would never materialize. Sir Keir Starmer has insisted there will be no vexatious prosecutions against anyone who battled terrorists in Northern Ireland as a result of Labour's Troubles legislation, even as SAS veterans threatened legal action over proposals they describe as manifestly deficient in terms of protections offered to former service personnel. Speaking as he traveled to the G20 summit in South Africa, the Prime Minister claimed to be absolutely confident that there will be no vexatious prosecutions because the legislation carefully sets out the balance that must be struck and particular protections for veterans. But the SAS Regimental Association has responded by stating that the Prime Minister's comments suggest he has either been poorly briefed or is determined to accept without question the Northern Ireland office's deeply flawed plan, questioning how our Prime Minister can endorse course of action that so obviously and profoundly damages Britain's defences at a time when they must be strengthened. Welcome to UK Bulletin Report, where we expose the truth about how Starmer's assurances about no vexatious prosecutions are contradicted by the legal assessment that the bill is manifestly deficient in veteran protections and could breach their rights under the European Convention on Human Rights, and how former Lieutenant Colonel Simon Barry's statement that the Prime Minister and his party may believe this, but the veteran and RUC community do not, reveals catastrophic loss of trust between those who served and the government that now proposes to expose them to prosecution. Subscribe now for daily analysis that refuses to accept ministerial assurances when legal experts representing those who fought IRA terrorism warn that legislation fails to provide protections promised, and when the involvement of the Republic of Ireland in new arrangements is described by veterans as betrayal of both the IRA's victims and our national sovereignty. The context for this controversy is essential to understanding why Starmer's assurances ring so hollow to those who served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. The previous government had enacted legislation intended to provide conditional immunity to those who served during that conflict, recognizing that soldiers and police officers who battled IRA terrorism did so under extraordinarily difficult circumstances, that they operated in an environment where terrorists used civilian cover and where distinguishing combatants from non-combatants was often impossible, and that decades later they should not face prosecution for split-second decisions made in Cola. Labour opposed this legislation whilst in opposition and has now moved to repeal it, replacing conditional immunity with new commission to investigate Troubles-related killings that veterans fear will be used to pursue politically motivated prosecutions against those who fought terrorism, whilst IRA members benefit from Good Friday Agreement protections. The body that represents the SAS and its veterans has raised strong concerns that those who served in the province could face prosecution as a result of Labour's decision to repeal the law intended to provide conditional immunity. These are not random critics or political opponents. These are legal representatives of the elite Special Forces unit that conducted the most dangerous counterterrorism operations during the Troubles, that suffered casualties whilst preventing IRA attacks, and that now faces prospect that elderly veterans could be dragged through courts to answer for actions taken decades ago in service of their country. When the SAS Regimental Association raises strong concerns about veteran prosecutions, when their legal representatives state that the bill is manifestly deficient in protections, when they warn that legislation could breach European Convention on Human Rights, These warnings deserve serious engagement rather than dismissive assurances. Starmer's response, delivered as he traveled to international summit rather than whilst engaging directly with veteran concerns, demonstrates the priority he assigns to this issue. His claim to be absolutely confident that there will be no vexatious prosecutions because the legislation carefully sets out the balance that must be struck is assertion without substantiation. What specific provisions in the legislation prevent vexatious prosecutions? What mechanisms exist to ensure that politically motivated cases cannot proceed? What protections exist that were absent from previous legislation that veterans supported? Starmer provides no answers to these questions, offering instead confident assertion that careful balance has been struck without explaining what that balance entails or how it will operate in practice. The claim that there are particular protections for veterans who served in terms of the approach, the process, and the protections we have put in place for them is similarly vague. What approach? What process? What specific protections? These are not rhetorical questions. These are substantive inquiries about how legislation will actually function when veterans face potential prosecution. The fact that Prime Minister cannot or will not articulate specific protections beyond vague references to approach and process suggests either that he does not understand his own legislation or that specific protections are insufficient to provide real safeguards, but he hopes vague assurances will pacify critics.
The SAS Regimental Association's response is devastating because it directly challenges Starmer's competence and honesty. Their statement that the Prime Minister's comments suggest he has either been poorly briefed or is determined to accept without question the Northern Ireland office's deeply flawed plan presents Prime Minister with uncomfortable choice. Either he does not understand the legislation he is defending, in which case he has been poorly briefed and should not be making confident assertions about protections he does not comprehend. Or he does understand that protections are inadequate but is determined to proceed anyway despite warnings from those who will be affected, in which case his assurances are knowingly false and designed to obscure reality until legislation passes and can no longer be stopped. The observation that when so many highly experienced, well-informed, shrewd, and long-term observers conclude with one accord that, regardless of Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn's assertions, the proposed legislation fails to protect veterans, then it behooves the Prime Minister to sit up and listen, is appeal to basic reasonableness. This is not partisan opposition or ideological disagreement. This is consensus among those with direct knowledge and experience that legislation is fundamentally flawed. When elite military units, former senior officers, legal experts, and veteran organizations all reach same conclusion that protections are inadequate, the appropriate response is to reconsider legislation rather than to offer confident assurances that everything is fine. The question that the SAS Regimental Association poses, how can our Prime Minister endorse course of action that so obviously and profoundly damages Britain's defenses at a time when they must be strengthened, goes beyond immediate question of troubles prosecutions to fundamental issue of military morale and recruitment. If veterans who fought terrorism can be prosecuted decades later, despite prime ministerial assurances that they would be protected, why would current service personnel trust similar assurances about conflicts they are fighting today? If government betrays those who served in past, why would anyone volunteer to serve in future? The first duty of government is defense of the realm, as the association notes. That defense depends on willing volunteers who trust that their service will be honored rather than prosecuted. Labor's troubles legislation undermines that trust in ways that will affect military effectiveness for generation. Simon Barry's statement that the Prime Minister and his party may believe this, but the veteran and RUC community do not, captures the catastrophic loss of trust between government and those who served. Starmer can make all the confident assertions he wants about no vexatious prosecutions. Veterans do not believe him. The Royal Ulster Constabulary community, which suffered devastating casualties fighting IRA terrorism, does not believe him. These are not people predisposed to distrust government or to oppose reasonable troubles legislation. These are people who served, who sacrificed, who lost colleagues, and who now see government preparing to expose them to prosecution whilst providing assurances that their own legal advisors tell them are worthless. The involvement of the Republic of Ireland in the new arrangements adds insult to injury. Barry describes this as betrayal of both the IRA's victims and our national sovereignty. The Republic of Ireland provided safe haven to IRA terrorists throughout the Troubles. IRA members crossed the border after attacks to escape British security forces. The Irish government's record on counterterrorism cooperation was at best ambiguous and at worst complicit. Now that same government is being given role in investigating British soldiers and police officers who fought IRA terrorism. This is not reconciliation. This is allowing a state that failed to adequately combat terrorism during the Troubles to retrospectively judge those who did combat it. Veterans understandably view this as grotesque betrayal of their service and sacrifice. The government's proposals setting up commission to investigate Troubles-related killings sound reasonable in abstract. Who could oppose investigating killings? But the reality is that IRA members are protected by Good Friday Agreement provisions that effectively provide immunity for terrorist acts committed before the agreement. The new commission will therefore investigate primarily British security forces rather than terrorists, because terrorists are already protected whilst soldiers and police are not. This creates a perverse situation where those who fought terrorism face greater legal jeopardy than the terrorists themselves, which is morally unconscionable and which veterans correctly identify as politically motivated witch hunt rather than genuine pursuit of justice. Starmer's absolute confidence that there will be no vexatious prosecutions and that the right balance has been struck in legislation is confidence that veterans do not share and that legal experts warn is misplaced. His assurances provide no legal protection, create no enforceable safeguards, and offer no recourse if prosecutions proceed exactly as veterans fear. These are political promises from Prime Minister who will not face consequences when those promises prove false, offered to veterans who will face prosecution if protections fail. The asymmetry is obvious and offensive. Starmer risks nothing by making confident assurances. Veterans risk prosecution, financial ruin through legal costs, and public humiliation of standing trial for actions taken in service of their country. When those stakes are so unequal, confident political assurances ring hollow against legal reality that protections are manifestly deficient. The SAS Regimental Association is right to threaten legal action. Veterans are right not to trust Starmer's promises. And the question of how Prime Minister can endorse course that so obviously damages Britain's defenses at time when they must be strengthened deserves answer that Starmer has not provided and apparently cannot provide.